Today is Saturday, November 26th, and this is William Michael of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. First, I'd like to wish you all a happy Thanksgiving, even though it's 2 days past. I hope that you enjoyed a happy holiday celebration with your family, and I wish you a blessed Advent as well as we get started this week with the first week of Advent. God bless you all. What I'd like to talk about today is something that I've experienced quite a bit and had to deal with throughout my adult Christian life, but most intensely since I started the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. And if you're a Catholic who is interested in doing things in the world, you're interested in actually carrying out the mission of the Catholic laity, which is to influence secular affairs, temporal affairs, in light of God's will, to actually direct, I should say, temporal affairs according to the will of God. If you're a Catholic who has the faith and charity and zeal to engage in the work of the laity, you're going to find that most members of the Catholic laity don't have an interest in doing that work. There's sort of a real active Catholic laity, and then there's a fake inactive Catholic laity. And this fake inactive Catholic laity wars against not just the active Catholic laity, but also against the clergy as well. And I'd like to talk about this because, first of all, if you're guilty of the habits of this group of people that I'm going to describe, I'd like you to change your life and become aware of it and work to avoid doing it. Even though from what I see, people who have this spirit don't seem to ever change. So the first reason I'd like to talk about it is so that if you struggle with this, you might become conscious of it and change it, even though I'm doubtful about that. But more importantly, if you are seeking to be an active Catholic layman, you won't be discouraged by this kind of people, and you won't allow them to ruin good works that you are willing to perform. Now, what there is, as I said, in the Catholic laity, there's two different kinds of laymen. The first kind are the active Catholic laymen, and these are people who are in the church and they love the Catholic faith, and they take up the work of the Catholic Church in their own secular circles. They take up the work. They seek to promote the Catholic faith. They seek to evangelize their neighbors and relatives. They seek to sanctify their lives in the world. They seek to glorify God in the temporal activities that they participate in, whether it's business or education or even just cultural pursuits. They seek to bring Christ into the world, to go into the world and make disciples. They seek to influence the world rather than be influenced by it. And this work is very difficult. This work that the Catholic laity is called to is very difficult work. It's very difficult because, first of all, we're limited in what we can do by God's commandments, by what's right. We have to compete, as it were, in the secular world against unbelievers and non-Catholics who are not limited in what they can do by God's commandments. They can lie, they can cheat, they can steal, they can work on Sundays, they can pull off all kinds of crooked works and manipulate people, take advantage of people, on and on. There's 1,001 apparent advantages that they have when it's time to work, because Christians are restricted by God's will. And so all of our Christian works have to be pursued within God's will, with moral restrictions. And this is good. Now, in the long run, this is what actually gives Christian works their advantages. The advantage they have is that they are restricted within God's will, and this is what allows them to actually be sustainable, what allows them to overcome, and in the long run, win the war, even though they may lose many battles. And it's this persevering, long-term mission that marks the Catholic laity. And it takes virtue, it takes faith, hope, and charity to be able to work in this way, to work little by little, taking humble forward steps as we're able to do so, being content with whatever progress is possible within God's will at any given time, and just continually making positive steps as God allows us to do so. It's very difficult work because we're often zealous and eager to get things done, and that's simply not how it gets done. And we have to learn this the hard way on many occasions, that no matter how zealous we are, these works just cannot progress at a pace faster than God permits. And that's the real challenge of the work of the Christian laity. Doing everything as God wills, as God allows in His providence, and being content to make little positive progress day by day, month by month, year by year in these Christian works. It's hard work, and if you have the character of an active Catholic layperson, you'll know that it's very hard work. If you watch the film of the life of Mother Teresa of Calcutta, played by Olivia Hussey, there's a scene where the Indian government just decides to bulldoze these houses that Mother Teresa has been working to build. And years of work and sacrifice has been poured into this project, and in a matter of minutes, these government officials are just crushing the work to the ground. And Mother Teresa in this film, I don't know if this is an actual quote from her life or if it's just part of the film, but she says, "It's so difficult to build and so easy to destroy. It's so difficult to build and so easy to destroy." And that's what makes the work of the Catholic laity so difficult, because it's work of building. We have to build good things. And that's just very difficult work. It's difficult physically, it's difficult mentally, it's difficult legally, it's difficult financially. It's very difficult work to build good things. And yet that's the work that the Christian laity has to perform, has to engage in. It's very difficult work. And there are some members of the Catholic laity who undertake that work, who engage in that work. And they're few. And most of the works, most of the positive works that you see being done among the Catholic laity, you'll find that they can be traced back to a small number of people who do that work. Now, the Catholic laity that does the work are constantly opposed by a number of different groups, some in the world outside the church, but worse, some in the church. And these are the inactive, negative laymen who don't do anything, but constantly retreat from the temporal battles that need to be fought. And rather than offer assistance to those who are doing the fighting, as it were, they sit around and idly criticize, scoff at, and find fault with what the other Catholics are actually doing. And they imagine that by finding fault, and these faults are often not even real faults. Often they're just normal difficulties of temporal affairs. But they highlight them and they magnify them by their talking. And what's already difficult work in the first place is made even more difficult for those actually doing the work by these idle, critical Christians who just sit around criticizing things. A good example of this in the church today would be someone like Taylor Marshall sitting around, literally sitting in his house, posting YouTube videos criticizing the things done by the Pope and the bishops, as the Pope and bishops actually work to do good things in the real world, dealing with all the difficulties inside and outside of the church, dealing with real relationships, real government issues, real legal issues, real human weaknesses and challenges, financial challenges, all these different limiting factors that the leaders of the church have to work within as they seek to do good. They have to do so with this idle punk on YouTube, just finding fault with or exaggerating the troubles that the hierarchy of the church has in its actual ministry in the world. And that's just a good, visible example of what I'm talking about. And really, what positive work is Taylor Marshall doing? We saw him involved in a school down in Texas that turned into a giant mess. He left the Anglican priesthood, could have been a Catholic priest, but chose not to. And so what is he doing? He's publishing videos on YouTube criticizing the work of the hierarchy of the church. And that's the kind of idle, negative layman that I'm talking about. But you'll find that anytime you seek to do something good, you'll find that the same kind of people will be present. They'll come out of the woodworks, as it were, when you try to undertake some good work. And these are difficult works. And one of the reasons why the Catholic culture, Catholic community is struggling and is just so deflated is because Catholics are afraid of undertaking these works because they know that these critics are lurking around every corner. And many people are simply afraid to undertake these works because they know that they're going to face this criticism. And it's something that the laity has to overcome. I mean, if Catholics have been willing to shed their blood and be tortured for the sake of Christian works throughout history, Catholics have to get over this middle school fear of peer pressure or scoffing from people who don't matter, people whose opinion isn't significant. Catholics have to get tougher mentally and personally to be able to undertake difficult works that are going to be humiliating, because they're going to have to struggle in order to succeed in these works, and it's going to take a long time with humbling, difficult work to be done. And many Catholics are simply afraid of this work. But like I said, there are some who undertake it, who aren't afraid, and they have to know that this negative, idle criticism isn't serious, isn't something that they should pay attention to, isn't something that they should allow to affect them. I think one of the advantages I had as a kid growing up was that I played sports. And one of the sports I played was baseball, and I was a pitcher in baseball. And as the pitcher, you have to take the ball and go stand out on the mound. And all of the taunting and all of the jeering of the opposing fans and players, almost all of it's directed at the pitcher for the other team. And through sports, I learned to tune all of that out. My grandfather told me not to have rabbit ears, but just to ignore it all. And through that experience as a kid growing up, I learned to know that it was necessary that the opponents would talk all kind of trash and try to get under my skin. They would magnify my faults. They would downplay my achievements to try to psych me out and cause me to not stay focused on the strategy that I needed to execute to win. That was the whole point of that criticism and trash talking. And I learned that in order to win, I had to ignore everything that my opponents said and just concentrate on what was in my control. And years of playing sports, competitive sports, especially in that position as a pitcher, I learned to not worry about what other people say, but just to focus on the actual game itself, to focus on the actual contest and the actual results of that contest. And when I became a Christian, I brought that mentality with me into my Christian life, and I can look at an undertaking and figure out what needs to be done, and then, expect that the criticism and the jeering and the taunting and the trash talking is going to come from people who are my opponents in that work, and I need to learn to tune them out and not listen. And I think Christians as a whole, we need to get better at that. When you see Christians all riled up with political controversies and social media, they get all emotional and upset. You just see that Christians who act like that are not going to be able to undertake these works. We have to be mentally tougher in order to do the things that need to be done. And what happens is Christians don't set honorable goals for their lives. They don't look at a problem and say, you know what, I'm going to work to remedy this problem. They complain as if someone else should remedy it. They blame it on other people. But they never are willing to step up and say, you know what, I'm going to do everything in my power to remedy this problem. I'm going to put my money on the table. I'm going to put my time and energy on the table. I'll sacrifice my sleep. I'm going to do whatever I can do to remedy this problem. Sorry, there's a little noise in the background from the cattle. But Christians need to be willing to put everything on the table and to realize that if God allows them to see a problem, that they have the opportunity to become at least part of the solution to that problem. And that once they step up and accept that challenge, they have to expect that all hell is going to break loose against them, because that's how opposition works in the Christian life. People who are idle don't get persecuted. The people who get persecuted are the people who undertake the work of the Christian church, whether as clergy or as laity. We need to set noble goals. We need to be willing to take on problems and present ourselves as not necessarily standalone solutions like David standing before Goliath, but we need to imitate David and step up in our own way and take on these things, because we don't know how God can bring about the solution to a problem, but God allows these problems to exist to give us the opportunity to serve Him faithfully and to merit rewards for our virtuous actions. But most Christians are afraid. They're afraid to undertake any of these tasks because they're afraid that they're going to be criticized. They don't have the resources available to do the work in a way that's materially comfortable or socially impressive. They're afraid to undertake works in humility. They're afraid to work one step at a time. They're afraid to start simply. They're afraid to set long-term goals and work patiently. They're just too worried about what idle people think and say, and so they never get started. They never undertake the challenges. They never see themselves as solutions to the problems. They just complain and act as if it's somebody else's job. There's some other Christian out there who should undertake this work. We don't set high enough goals. We're not ambitious enough as Christians to undertake challenging problems and work for their resolution. And that's on us. We have to get tougher. We have to be willing to try harder things and to undertake more challenging struggles. And when we do so, like I said, one of the challenges is that it's just very difficult. We have to start simply. We have to work humbly. We have to be willing to progress one step at a time. We have to accept the fact that what we do may look like it's failing on many occasions. We may have real setbacks that cause us to lose. We may make bad decisions that we have to accept the consequences of and regroup and start fighting again. And it's difficult. And what's going to happen is that as we get into this work, there's going to be a crowd of people around us that just sit and watch and wait and announce, as it were, every negative result. Everything negative that happens, they amplify. Every positive thing that's accomplished, they downplay. And we have to understand that this is just a part of the challenge of this work. We have to learn to identify who the negative, idle people are in our circles. We have to learn that this is a real character that we have to identify and learn to not pay attention to. They're an opponent. They could be a close friend. They could be a fellow Christian. Could be a family member. Could be a spouse. Could be a child. But we're going to see that when we begin to undertake Christian works, opponents are going to manifest themselves with doubts, criticisms, just all kinds of nastiness as we try to do something good. They'll pretend that any difficulty we face is a sign that the project should be abandoned. Every cost is too much. Every sacrifice is imprudent. And we'll hear this kind of stuff from these people as soon as we get started. And we'll hear this kind of stuff the whole entire time that we try to do good works. And we have to be mentally strong enough not only to handle the challenge of the work itself, but we have to be strong enough to handle the mental discouragements and attacks and challenges that we're going to have to deal with at the same time, especially when things are most difficult. Now for me, as I said, I learned this by playing sports. I sort of had a tutoring in this when I grew up playing sports, and it may sound bizarre, but I actually love this challenge. I love this contest. I loved the stress and the pressure of playoffs and championships and tournaments. I loved going out onto the mound and knowing that I had a chance to help my team win. I loved that contest. I loved that competition. And when my sports playing days ended, I sought to gratify that love of competition through my studies. When I was in college, I saw academics as my new sport, my new contest. And then when I got to work in Christian education, I saw the challenges and the problems with education as my sport. That, when I saw myself needing to be willing to take the ball and go step on the mound and try to win and do whatever I could do to win. So I have a delight in this contest. I like the challenge of it. I'm aware of the challenge. I understand the challenge. And I love it. And I see other Christians who are intimidated by it. And one of the reasons why I think they're intimidated is because when other people criticize them, especially other Christians, they second guess themselves and assume that these other Christians must be right. But there's a clear sign that you have to learn to look at. There's a clear sign you have to learn to look at, to discern whether someone is actually criticizing you because you're stupid and crazy, or that they're criticizing you because they're actually an opponent of good work being done, and it's their own life. It's their own life. If you look at the person who's criticizing your works and you see that they're not doing any of these works themselves, you can be sure that that person is just an idle critic. If you're criticized by a wise person who's done many good works, who has taken on many great projects, who's remedied great problems in Christian life, well, then that's a person you should listen to. But if you see that the person criticizing you is just an idle critic, you need to learn to ignore that person, even separate yourself from that person. Get away from that person. Don't talk about these problems with that kind of a person. Don't talk about what you're doing. Don't share information about what you're just asking for discouragement and that negative nothingness for no reason. And you need to learn to separate yourself from that. Now, we also have to be careful, because I've seen a number of Christian men who appear to be problem solvers. They appear to be problem solvers because they're involved in lots of stuff. But it's often just because they have money. And they use their money, they use their abundance of money to try and gain favor with different people in the church. And yet their money is obtained in unjust ways, or it's obtained in dishonorable ways. Like, I once knew a wealthy Christian. I was actually teaching, and this man wanted to financially support me in my work and education because I was having a good effect on his children, and he knew that I was considering doing other things. So he wanted to actually support me financially to try to keep me at his children's school. And as you know, he invited me out to lunch to talk about things and how he could help and how he could make my situation at this school more comfortable for my family. And yet, as I got to know him, I realized that this man just worked. He was an investor in the credit industry, and he was just making tons and tons of money off of a dishonorable industry. And yet this man was held in honor. He was given school board and church board membership positions because he was a wealthy man, but he wasn't even gaining his wealth in some kind of honorable Christian way. And he used his abundance of money to gain influence in all of these different church activities and organizations. And that kind of a person, I'm sure that the money can be helpful, but we need to be careful that we don't allow wealthy people who gain their money through less than honorable activities to sort of snake their way into all different kinds of things and gain an appearance of being real Christian workers when they're really not doing the Christian work. That can be a little deceiving. So when I say there is a group of people whose criticism we do need to listen to, it's people who have done good Christian works. And they may see something wrong in what we're doing, or they may have advice, but I think that we will normally find that they appreciate the effort that's being made and offer positive criticism, not just idle negative criticism. So you can discern in those situations, when you do face criticism, you can tell the difference between people who are trying to make you stop doing good or stop fighting against a certain good cause, or fighting for a good cause, or fighting against a problem, and people who are actually trying to help you succeed at it. So be careful in discerning the source of that criticism. But normally, in most cases, you'll find that the people who are critical and negative are just idle people. And you really need to separate yourself from them, because that negativity is like a poison just dripping in your veins like an IV as you hear it. And again, it intensifies anytime things get difficult. You need to learn to separate yourself from those people, because that negative discouragement does no good. It doesn't make you stronger. It just tempts you to abandon the work that needs to be done, especially when it takes a turn for the worse, and it's especially difficult to continue in. So, the work of this active Catholic laity is discouraging and difficult. It's challenging. It's humbling. It's slow. But it's permanent. It's lasting. It's persevering. It's effective. And it's, most importantly, it's meritorious. It merits reward for the Christian willing to undertake and maintain it. And that's ultimately what should motivate us in this work, is not necessarily results, because results aren't even necessarily in our control. for example, I may undertake some great project and be working at it and working at it and working at it, and I may die in the midst of that work. But something that I started or something that I inspired might lead others to actually bring it to fulfillment. And that's meritorious for me, even though it wasn't accomplished in my own time or by my own hands. And that's why our motive in these works is not necessarily to bring about the result, which God may not grant to us, but it's to simply put up a fight and begin trying to get the momentum started to move in the right direction. And either God will grant us the honor of achieving these goals ourselves, or He'll bring others together to help us do it, or He'll simply use the good work that we do to get started and allow someone else to pick up where we left off and bring it to fulfillment. But it's our duty to simply change the momentum, to simply make things begin to turn around. Imagine if it was a giant boulder rolling down the side of a hill, and it was a destructive situation where a boulder was headed down towards, let's say, a group of kids or something, and you see this giant boulder heading down the mountain, and you see that it's going to injure these kids. And what can you do? You can say, well, I can't stop this giant boulder coming down a mountain. And I've got a couple of options. I can either yell at everybody to stop the boulder, I can just watch the boulder, or I can run and put myself in front of that thing and just try to slow it down even a little bit, because any resistance decreases the destruction that's going to be caused, at least by some degree. And so just getting out in front of it and making an effort to stop it may inspire others to imitate me and follow and do the same. And if nobody helps, I'll deserve the reward for whatever damage wasn't done by that boulder. And so that's, if we look at it with a positive attitude, focused on earning merit for doing good, we'll see that any effort to do good is worth it. Any effort to do good should be done. That the result is not necessarily what should lead us to make a decision. The question is simply whether or not we did what we could to try and slow that boulder down, if not actually turn it around and put it back where it came from. And so there are many things in society today where they're just running downhill at full speed, heading for destruction. And Christians are watching them. They're watching them, they're stepping out of the way, and they're allowing these things to just pick up more and more destructive momentum. And the idle critics will say, well, what are you going to do? You can't stop that giant boulder. You're not going to be able to save these people from this trouble. And they discourage you from even making an effort. Whereas you should know that making the effort is honorable, and you'll be rewarded for it because it's meritorious. And that's what should motivate our willingness to undertake these works. And that's why the taunting and the jeering from the opponents, whoever they may be, shouldn't affect us, because what ultimately matters is if we did what we could. not whether we actually accomplished everything or caused the changes to be realized, but whether the resources that God put at our disposal were exhausted in trying to do so. That's meritorious. And Christians need to learn to have that mentality when they look at problems. They need to learn to see. For example, in education, they can look at the Classical Liberal Arts Academy and see the work that I'm doing to resist the problems in modern education. They could say, well, this organization here is already undertaking this work. What can I do to help? And that's one way to make a difference, is just to help people who are already doing the work, and then to look at other areas where no one is working and saying, look, I may not be able to accomplish this by myself, but I can at least change the momentum in the right direction. And I'm going to put myself in the way of this problem to at least slow it down, if not turn it around. And these missions give us a purpose in life. They give us something to live for. They give us something to pray for, something to sacrifice for, something to study for, something to fast and work for. They give purpose to our life. They cause everything in our life to make sense, rather than leaving us in this miserable idleness where religion just becomes trivia, just gathering information about a life that you yourself don't live, about people who tried to do things which you don't try to do. And religion loses all of its fire, all of its teeth, when we don't engage in active apostolic works as members of the Christian laity. The Psalms don't make sense in the life of an idle Christian. The prayers don't make sense in the life of an idle Christian. All of these things take on their meaning and are effective when we actually are working for the kingdom of God, when we're working as laymen to direct temporal affairs according to God's will. And so my goal in this talk was to encourage you, if you desire to be an active member of the Catholic laity and actually undertake works where you seek to direct temporal affairs according to God's will, and help you to understand that you really need to be careful to discern the sources and the effects of this negative idol criticism that comes from all different sources, so that you can learn to ignore that negativity and just focus on the work that needs to be done, so that you can stay positive and just focus on doing all that you can positively, and not worrying about the judgment and criticism and opinions and comments of others who have no interest in helping. And what they really want to do is they want to discourage you from doing things that will make them feel guilty. That's what they want to do. They want to discourage you from undertaking actions that they themselves are not willing to undertake, because when you do that work, you make them feel guilty. And that's why they like to discourage others from doing that work, because when you undertake that work, when you do good things, when you practice the Christian faith, when you step up and oppose the enemies of the Catholic faith, you make all of the people who are too timid or lazy to do so feel guilty. You make them feel uncomfortable. And so they try to attack you and tell you to get back in line with them, because they don't want to have to deal with the pressure of having you model active Christian living, which exposes their idleness. And that's why they get frustrated and nasty and try to discourage you, because of the effect that your life has on them, which is to convict them of their idleness, which is what you should desire to do. And it forces them to make a decision whether they're going to get up and help or whether they're just going to accept the fact that they don't do anything. And you have to understand what motivates their criticism. You also have to understand that talking about things is easy for them because they're happy to talk about things. They're happy to argue and wrangle and discuss things because you're just remaining idle. But when you actually undertake the works, that's when you'll see them get ugly. When you actually fast, you'll see them get frustrated. When you say your prayers, you'll see them get frustrated. When you begin to make sacrifices and actually try to do things, you'll see them get frustrated. And you should be eager to have that effect, because that's part of what it means to admonish sinners and to challenge fellow Christians to do good, not just by sitting around complaining, but by actually doing good works and letting the model that you establish be what preaches to them and convicts them in their idleness. So I hope that that's encouraging. I encourage you to undertake these works. I encourage you to seek to be a part of the solution to problems that you see around you. And don't worry about whether or not you can accomplish everything by yourself. Simply seek to be as influential a worker as you can within your own limitations of resources and ability and opportunities. If you see people already doing the work, find out how you can help them. If you don't see anyone doing the work, find out how you can at least do something to help change the momentum as things run downhill. I hope that's encouraging. God bless.